Could a simple toy soldier have such a significant impact on a broken family? I challenge you to try to predict the ending of this mind-bending plot. Keep an eye out for the episode question at the end of each story. You are about to experience the outermost reality.
I woke up to the sound of a truck blaring horn as I struggled to take control of my car's steering wheel. I immediately pulled over to the side of the road as I knew I could have died. I cannot believe I fell asleep at the wheel. I've heard this happening to drivers, but never thought it could happen to me. My name is John Allen, and I'm halfway home to the place where I grew up. Born and raised in Los Angeles, California, I had to leave home right out of college to start my career. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona several months ago for a job I accepted. I'm returning home to celebrate my mother's birthday, and tonight I have a long, exhausted drive ahead of me. Driving countless miles, I sipped my last bit of coffee. This next stretch of the highway has stunning scenery, but it can get dark at night. The engine's hum and the tire's steady rhythm lulled me into a trance-like state. The caffeine is slowly fading. I can feel my eyelids heavying, and fatigue is starting to set in again. I'm asking myself if I should park my car for a quick nap. I decided to pull over at a rest stop when I saw a man in military fatigues with his thumb raised in the air. Already pressed for time, I decided to pick up the hitchhiker. His presence will hopefully help keep me awake. I drove past him, slowed my car to a complete stop, and flagged him down. In my rear-view mirror, he sprints towards my car, and I unlock my passenger door. I greeted the man with a warm smile. "Need a lift?" His eyes lit with relief, and he replied exhaustedly, "Yes, please." The military man, who was athletically built, immediately took a seat. "Hi, my name is John." I introduced myself, hoping the person I had just picked up would resemble someone normal. He responds, "My name is Steve Tennyson, and thank you for picking me up." "Where are you headed?" I looked at him and said, "I'm heading to Los Angeles." Steve's face lit up as he excitedly said he was headed to the same place. I asked him if he had been walking for a while. "I can't even tell you how long I've been walking. It seems like forever," he answered, wiping the sweat from his forehead. I tried to look closely at his military fatigues, but the inside of my car was dark. Curious, I asked Steve what branch of the military he served. Steve said he was in the Army. "Hey, my father also served in the Army." I excitedly replied, and I already felt we had a bond. Seemingly intrigued, Steve would ask me many questions about my childhood. His questions centered around my father and my upbringing in Southern California. I told him that, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of details about my father's life. I explained that I dearly loved my mother, but we had some disagreements growing up because she never disclosed anything about Dad. When I asked to see pictures of my father, my mother only owned a single grainy photo of him and his Army buddies. Even his death in the Vietnam War was shrouded in mystery, and Mom never provided information on how he died. The drive with Steve felt like a conversation with a long-lost friend. His curious nature made it easy for me to tell him about myself. He was curious about how my life experiences without a father figure. He genuinely seemed concerned that I might harbor bad feelings for my dad not being there for me. Oddly, I never felt inadequate or insecure growing up without a father. The times I felt his absence was on milestone occasions like prom and graduations. I explained to Steve that my curiosity about my father was more about knowing my history than wanting to fill a void. An hour passed by, and I felt it was time to ask Steve questions about his background. "Enough about me. Let us talk about you, Steve," he replied. "Sure, John. What do you want to know?" I noticed he held something in his hand during our entire conversation, so I asked, Before you tell me about yourself, what are you holding in your left hand? You have held on to that thing our entire drive." He humbly said, "It's a toy soldier carved from bamboo and belongs to someone special." I assumed it was for his child and left it at that. "So, who are you visiting in Los Angeles?" Steve did not respond, and there was an awkward silence as he finally spoke. "John, please tell your mom I forgive her." I remember asking myself, what did he just say? I looked over at Steve, and he was gone. No one was occupying the passenger seat. I screamed aloud, gripping the steering wheel, and slammed on the brakes. I was completely shaken up and trying to process what had just happened. Bewildered, questions flooded my mind. Where did he go? Was Steve a figment of my imagination? Did I dream of our entire conversation? At that moment, I was overcome with emotions and questioning my sanity. The only conclusion I came up with was I must have decided to take that nap on the side of the road, and I was stuck somewhere between a dream and reality. This experience left me with a jolt of adrenaline that would carry me home to Los Angeles. When I finally reached my mother's home, right before leaving my car, I noticed something wedged between the cup holder and the passenger seat. It was a toy soldier that Steve Tennyson held inside his hand. I slowly grabbed the toy, almost expecting it to disappear like Steve did. Having that toy in my hand made me ask myself if I could distinguish between reality and imagination. My body felt weightless. My mind was blurry as I couldn't recall unlocking the front door. I entered my bedroom and went to bed. I woke up several hours later, hoping it was all just a dream. Yet next to my side table was the toy soldier. I could hear my mother yell my name from a distance, so I quickly hid the toy soldier underneath my pillow. Mom walked into my room, hugged me, and asked when I arrived home. I told her I got in around 3 a.m., but kept quiet so I wouldn't wake her. After catching up with her about my new job, I felt anxious about bringing up my experience on the road. Steve's last words kept replaying in my head. "Please tell your mom I forgive her." I hesitated to ask my mother if she knew someone named Steve Tennyson. I decided not to bring it up because her birthday party would start later that day. She was expecting many people to attend this milestone birthday. Later that afternoon, many of Mom's friends celebrated with her, and the party was a huge success. As the night was winding down, I could see behind Mom's smiles. There was always a hint of sadness. Ever since I can remember, that sadness was always present. Growing up, she was always concerned that I might feel less than my friends because my father was gone. During my teenage years, I realized those concerns about me were more a reflection of her feelings about him. She would never love anyone like my father. Sure, she would go on occasional dates, but nothing would ever get serious with anyone. After the last party guest left, I helped Mom pick up the house. We finally had a moment where we could talk. I looked at her as she was doing the dishes and asked if she had heard the name Steve Tennyson. She dropped the glass she was holding and, with an unsettled voice, "Where did you hear that name?" I went into my story of picking him up on the way home, but he vanished. I could see in her eyes that she knew who he was. She asked me if I was telling her the truth, and I told her I believed so. Mom turned her back to me and muttered, "Steve has been dead for 23 years. Confused, I raised my voice. "How is all this possible, Mom?" "No more secrets. Who is Steve?" We sat down and poured a glass of wine. I could see she was hesitant to answer my question, but something inside her decided it was time to tell me the truth. Mom explained it started years ago when she was pregnant with me. She got the devastating news that Dad had passed away in the war. There was no information on how he died, she explained. Lost and upset, she would get a phone call from a man named Steve Tennyson. His voice was shaky as he explained that he was a close friend of her husband Robert. Steve explained during their time in the Vietnam War, they grew close as they would spend countless hours together. Then he asked her if he could deliver something that belonged to her husband. They both settled on a date when he could come to Los Angeles. Steve traveled over 700 miles to personally deliver the gift to her. On the way to LA, his car broke down numerous times, and he hitchhiked to get to California. Arrived at her home, the doorbell rang. Mom answered the door, and Steve introduced himself, and he looked visibly nervous. She welcomed him in and asked Steve to get comfortable. My mother had a million questions for Steve to answer. The big one was the circumstances surrounding my father's death. "Steve, please tell me how my husband passed away. The telegram didn't have any information about his death," she asked with nervousness. Steve was fidgety as he detailed the story of her husband's last day. He recounts, "We deployed into the jungle looking for the enemy that fateful day. We learned they were nearby, so our team set up our ambushes. We knew the enemy would eventually cross into our kill zone. Robert's hand signaled to us that he heard footsteps. Shots began to fire, and one enemy came from Robert's blind spot. I shot at the enemy behind him, and, in the shots exchange, I accidentally shot your husband. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill him." Steve began to weep as he was reliving that nightmare. He explained that Robert was accidentally killed by his own hands rather than by the enemy. Mom involuntarily had an outburst. She said she unfortunately did not react well to Steve's story. "It's your fault he's not here. You have taken my husband and the father of my child away from us. Get out! Get out!" she yelled at the top of her lungs. Before he left, Steve reached into his pocket and handed my mom a toy. "Your husband was carving this bamboo toy soldier for his son and passed away before he could complete it. I finished it for him because I knew he would have wanted that. Please give it to your son when he is older." Steve stood still, wiping the tears in his eyes. Regretfully, Mom said she threw the toy soldier back at Steve and pleaded with him to leave. A week later, after her emotions simmered, she contacted Steve to apologize and explain that her actions were irrational. Calling his home, a woman answered the phone. She only assumed the woman she was speaking to was Steve's wife. The woman disclosed that Steve recently passed away. According to the police report, Steve was drinking and driving at a high rate of speed, lost control of his car, and hit a tree. He died instantly. The woman would further express her frustrations because Steve never had a history of drinking alcohol. I held on to my mom's hand as I could tell the difficulty of her telling this story. She looked at me and cried, "I killed him. It was my fault that Steve died. I know he would be alive today if I had done things differently. Also, that precious toy soldier your dad made for you, I would do anything to get that back." At that moment, I pulled the toy soldier out of my pocket and handed it to her. Mom's eyes lit up as Mom adamantly insisted, "This is the toy. I still remember it all these years. I don't know what's happening. How is this possible?" Looking into her eyes, I realized this toy's importance to her as I held her hand. "Mom, I don't know, but Steve gave that to me and wanted me to tell you something important. He wanted you to know that he forgives you." She began to weep uncontrollably. That weekend finally came to an end, and I reluctantly had to drive back home to Phoenix. I hugged my mom and thanked her for having the strength to tell me her story. She has kept that secret, which weighed heavily on her all these years. And as for Steve, I can't help thinking that his ghost walked that long, lonely highway. His sole mission was to deliver that toy soldier to me. Now I know Steve and my mom can rest now. They are no longer prisoners of that moment when they both met each other 23 years ago.